Hi guys, today's lesson is going to be about the basics of skill acquisition, so kind of like an introductory lesson. So by the end of this video you should be able to define what skill acquisition actually is. You should be able to identify what a motor skill is and be able to apply it in the context of volleyball and understand the difference between a skilled and an unskilled performance. So, basic definition, can't talk about it unless we know what it is. So skill acquisition, it's the science that underpins, this is important here, underpins movement and learning execution and is often referred to as motor learning and control. Each stage embodies unique characteristics relative to an athlete's level of performance of a skill or activity. So basically how you are learning a physical skill and how you progress through that learning is skill acquisition. So what is a motor skill? Really important. A motor or movement skill is an activity that involves voluntary, that's important, voluntary muscular movement to complete a reasonably complex predetermined task. Now, we do break things down to fundamental motor skills or fundamental movement skills. Now, I'll go through that in the next slide. But voluntary is really important. It's a voluntary muscular movement. It's something that has required the thought process to initiate movement through neural control. Okay, so it's not just cutting out the brain, like for example the heart does not require voluntary control. So therefore it's not a motor skill. But anything that basically involves your limbs or movement of your body is going to be a motor skill. So how well a skill is completed depends on many factors, but some of those factors are how often you practice. Not just how often you practice, but how accurately you are practicing. So people say practice makes perfect. Not quite right. Perfect practice makes perfect. If you're practicing a skill using the incorrect technique over and over again, that's not particularly going to help your motor skills. How much of the movement is learned through practice, and what particular practice are you doing? So if you're doing a particular technique but your balance isn't great, then that's going to affect your ability to perform the technique in the first place. How well the learning is applied to make efficient movement. So that's that perfect practice thing. So if we break it down to fundamental motor skills, some examples, not all of them, of fundamental motor skills are the really basic core elements of our movement. So things like being able to catch, kick, run, perform a vertical jump, do an overhand throw, bounce a ball, leap, dodge, punt, forehand strike. So forehand strike as in being able to use, generally speaking, a bat in the forehand direction, and a two-handed sidearm strike, like for example a softball swing. They are some examples. Other examples of movement skills, for example, are balance and coordination. They are required for a lot of these things. So it's probably pretty hard to kick if you don't have good balance. So they're important. These are basic building blocks for a lot of skills within certain sports. So a catch, for example, in the context of volleyball is important, particularly for setting. So when learning to set, in the window you would first start with a catch and release, and then you speed up that movement so that it becomes a set. It's really important to understand what is a skilled performer versus an unskilled performer. So if you are a skilled performer, or if there is a skilled performance, it's identified by somebody who can anticipate what their opponent is about to do, so read the play. Somebody who can perform consistently, it's not just a one-off, you can continually hit a target or thereabouts. You work economically or efficiently, okay? So if you're running, that you have an efficient technique, not one that's wasted with side-to-side movement. You've got good timing, so you're able to track a ball well, for example. You appear to have all the time in the world, and that's because, generally speaking, of your ball tracking skills, depending on what sport you're playing. React, you're able to react quickly and precisely, so your thought processes have been fine-tuned over practice. You're able to adapt your skills to suit performance levels, so to suit your opponent or to suit conditions that you're under. You can read the patterns of play well, and your responses are ideal for the performance of the task. In order to gain a skilled performance, you need a predetermined goal. It involves a complex sequence of movements. You need to be able to organise time, space and muscular control. So know where your body is in space and be able to coordinate that. And you must be able to learn through practice. It depends on the performer's ability to think, interpret the conditions of the environment and select an appropriate response or action. So guys, that in a nutshell is a very basic introduction to skill acquisition. I want you to now start thinking about how that applies to other sports, but we're going to start in particular with volleyball. Cheers.